Riders on the MBTA are used to breakdowns and delays, but none of these compare with the widespread paralysis following the record snow of the past few weeks. Some problems were beyond the T's control, but others reflect a state of neglect that was cause for alarm even more than 5 years ago. And behind the problems with management lie political decisions about funding and expansion. One of the advocates with ideas for a solution is our guest, a staff attorney with MASSPIRG, Kirstie Pecci. And you're also working with a coalition of transportation advocacy groups. So
Yes.
What's the focus now with all this happening?
The focus now is to actually keep saying what we've been saying and keep advocating for what we've been advocating for, and that is we need to invest in our transportation system. When I was here, I think it was about 6 weeks ago, the report that we issued then talked about 3 recommendations for the new governor, and one of them was increased funding for the system, and that is what we need today. And we're seeing now the chickens have come home to roost.
Well, let's filter out all the snow and talk about things that reflect decisions about either equipment or operations. Explain how that sort of difference would have made it a lot easier to bear.
Well, if I can take a step back, even a step further, we've got to remember how we got where we are. And that is, originally, when it was determined that we needed increased funding for transportation for the MBTA, the deal was made that the sales tax, part of it would be used to fund the MBTA, and in return the MBTA would assume some of the debt from the big dig. And that turned out to be a bad idea in a lot of ways. The revenue never came through the way it was supposed to. The projections were much higher than the actual from the sales tax. The projections were much higher than the actual revenue from the sales tax, and the debt continues to grow and is still on the shoulders of the MBTA. And then, we've known for many years now. In fact, Governor Romney appointed a commission a bipartisan commission that issued a report in 2009 that stated we needed a $1 billion investment a year for the next 10 years to get our system to a state of good repair. And we haven't done that. We took steps to do that. We did invest more in 2013 in the Transportation Finance Act, but we have not got that full amount of money that we need to do things like replace all of the cars that need to be replaced, replace and repair the electrical system, and the list goes on and on and on, and we just haven't done that.
When I read the Globe story about still using direct current to power the trains from the third rail instead of alternating current, which has been done in some other American cities for more than a decade, I think.
Right.
Why did that happen?
Well, when choices were made, when you don't have enough money to run your system, look at your own household, right? When you don't have enough money to replace your dishwasher as well as put food on the table, you're going to keep putting food on the table. And the MBTA very logically made that choice to keep services running, to keep their doors open, to keep driving the buses and trains, but not to do things like fix the electrical system. And that's why it happened. Those kinds of repairs aren't easy, aren't fun, they're not sexy, and so they haven't happened. And we really need to understand the impact of a system, and I think this is a unique moment in time for transportation advocates for that reason. We've been saying this for a long time, that we need to invest in the system or it will break down. This is what it looks like when the system breaks down, and we're all suffering because of that. Small business owners, people are trying to get to their jobs, everybody's hurting financially, and their lifestyle and everything that they normally do it's ground to a halt. Transportation is central to our ability to function as a modern society, and that's what we've seen. This is what the world is like without a public transit system.
At the same time, in recent years, with all these problems going on, there has been expansion, and each project has its own degree of merit, but is there maybe more expansion than we can handle?
Well, I find that to be the idea of expansion versus repair to be a false distinction. That's a red herring, in my opinion, Chris, because what's happening is we have folks who don't really want to invest in the system. They don't want to make the hard choices that we need to raise more revenue. We can say all day long that we don't want to raise taxes, and no one wants to pay more taxes. But the reality is that we need to repair the system. So folks who don't actually want to repair the system and spend that money and actually raise that money, don't want to, the leadership that's lacking there, those folks are saying the reason we're in this state is because of all these expansions that have been made. And what's interesting to me about that too is a lot of the things that are, quote, expansions are in actuality, for instance, if one quote expansion that's been pointed to is replacing the Blue Line cars. Well, the Blue Line cars are working because they were replaced.
They're the best rapid transit line these days.
So, and because they were replaced. And if we had the red and orange line cars that we've ordered, but that are going to take some time to come in, we'd be saying that about those cars too. So to me, those are not expansions. That's a red herring that's being used to obfuscate the real problem. And the real problem here is we've known for years we had repairs to make, and we haven't done it. And so now we call upon the leadership of the Commonwealth. And I think everybody who understands transit and has been faced with these terrible choices of how you get to work every morning this past month, everybody understands that we need leadership now. We need the governor and the legislators to sit down and draft a budget and pass a budget that actually will take care of these problems.
Because one of the other problems that we have a new governor who's very strong on the mantra of no new taxes. We had a referendum question. People were against indexing the gas tax for inflation. Mm-hmm. So how do you counter that message? I mean, it seems to be a strong message that we don't want to spend more.
Well, my understanding of the ballot question was that folks did not want an automatic increase in the gas tax. That was really the resounding platform that ballot question passed on. So the answer instead is for the governor and his I believe that his draft budget is due March 4th. That budget's got to include how we handle this transportation crisis and fixing this infrastructure. And then the legislature has to regularly visit this problem. And one of the reasons that we write the report that just came out last week, Keeping on Track, is because had we kept a keen eye on the revenues that never materialized from the sales tax initially, if we had said, whoa, those revenues are not coming through, and these are our actual expenses. If we'd done a good job of doing that, and then hopefully the legislator would have listened at that point, then we would not be in this fix. So that's why we release regular reports that look at these numbers. This report was a snapshot of the last 12 months, and looking at what revenues came through. Some performed a little bit better, some performed a little bit worse. There were increased MBTA fares that MBTA did well. There were larger revenues than we expected from the sale of cars. And then other things cost a lot more money than we expected them to. One continued underestimation in cost is snow removal, ironically. And we detailed that in the report. So we have to be realistic about where the money's coming in and where the money's going out, and make sure that we're actually covering our needs.
What about late night service? It seems to be doing better than it was the last time we tried it. It's also a more robust service, mm-hmm. but a lot of people using it already have passes, so it doesn't seem to be bringing in much more revenue.
Well, I think that when we're looking at the system and any new operations or operations that are being put back in place, because that's late night service is something, it's an old idea that we're putting back in place after we had to cut it. We have to look at that in terms of meeting the needs of our citizens, because that need is only expanding and expanding. In 2005, the T was doing 1.1 million trips a day. Okay, now the T is doing 1.3 million trips a day. It's projected that within the next 5 years, they're going to do 1.4 or 1.6 million trips a day. And the millennials and folks that we want to keep here in Boston, if we want to be a competitive world-class city, students who come here to get an education, really a brain trust that we want to hold on to and keep them working here in Massachusetts, they expect a world-class public transportation system. They don't want to drive a car. They're not getting their licenses. And actually, MASSPIRG and USPIRG have written repeated reports analyzing this and figuring this out. Millennials aren't going to be driving. So they're going to go where they don't have to drive. And we have to meet that need if we want our city to be as vibrant and economically strong as we do.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Good to see you.
From MASSPIRG, Kirstie Pecci.